Let's begin with a moment you already know. Someone speaks to you in English. A teacher, a colleague, a stranger on the street. Maybe it's someone you've been hoping to talk to. And the moment they open their mouth, something remarkable happens inside you. You understand every single word. The sentences land clearly. The meaning is right there. You get it completely. And then comes your moment. The space opens. It's your turn to speak. All you have to do is say something, anything. Even one sentence, even a few words, and nothing comes out. Not because you don't know what to say, not because you didn't understand, not because your English is bad. You've studied for years, you've watched hundreds of hours of English content, you've read novels in English, you dream in English sometimes, you understand everything, but the words won't come. Instead, something else happens. Your heart speeds up a little, your mind goes oddly blank. You feel a strange wall go up somewhere between what you know and what you're supposed to say. And the moment passes, the chance disappears. And later, alone, you replay the whole thing and say perfectly, in your head, everything you should have said out loud. If that moment is familiar to you, this masterclass was built for you. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you're here, and you're here because you've been living with a gap that nobody prepared you for, a gap that your English teacher never warned you about, the gap between understanding English and speaking it. This is not a vocabulary lesson. This is not a grammar class. This is not a pronunciation course. This is something more honest and more necessary than all of that combined. This is an investigation into why a person who understands everything can still say nothing. And more importantly, this is a system for closing that gap permanently so that the next time your turn comes, something real and true and confident comes out of your mouth. We're gonna move through this masterclass in lessons. Each lesson builds on the one before it. Each one takes you deeper into the real reason you freeze and further into the tools you need to stop freezing. Don't rush, don't skip ahead, let every lesson land. Before we begin the lessons, I want to say one more thing. This masterclass is not going to be comfortable, not all of it. Some of what I say is going to press on places that have been protected for a long time. Some of the things I ask you to do are going to feel risky. Some of the truths I share are going to require you to question beliefs you have carried for years. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. That discomfort is a sign that something important is happening. Growth lives at the edge of comfort. Real change lies a little past where you currently stop yourself. You have been stopping yourself for a while now. But that ends here. Not because I said so, because you chose to be in this masterclass, because some part of you already knows that the silence has cost you enough, because you are ready even if it doesn't fully feel that way yet, to become the speaker you have always had the capacity to be. This masterclass is 14 lessons plus this opening. It covers the psychology, the neuroscience, the practical habits, and the identity work that together produce a real and lasting change in how you speak English. By the end, you will not only understand why you freeze, you will have a complete system for unfreezing. And more than that, you will have a different relationship with your own voice. Because the voice you've been holding back is worth more than silence. And it's time to let it out. Lesson 1, the freeze is not a language problem. The first thing we need to understand is also the most important thing we are going to say in this entire masterclass. The freeze is not a language problem. Read that again. Say it out loud right now if you can. The freeze is not a language problem because everything that comes after this lesson depends on you believing that. Not just intellectually, not just nodding along, actually believing it in a way that changes how you behave. Here is the proof. You understand English. You have already proven that. Every time you watch a movie and follow the story without subtitles, you prove it. Every time you read an article and understand what the writer means, you prove it. Every time someone speaks to you and you nod because you genuinely comprehend what they said, you prove it. The language is inside you. It is not missing. You are not missing English. You are missing something else entirely. So the question becomes, what are you missing? And the answer is not what most people expect. What you are missing is output confidence, not output skill, confidence. Let's separate those two things because they are very different. Skill is the knowledge you carry. It is the grammar you studied, the vocabulary you accumulated, the patterns you have internalized over years of reading, listening, and learning. Skill is what allows you to understand. And you have skill. You have proven that. Confidence is something different. Confidence is the permission your brain gives itself to act on the skill it already has. And for most English learners who freeze, the skill is fully present. The confidence is what's missing. Think about what freezing actually feels like. It feels like your mind goes blank, but here's the thing about that blankness. It is not emptiness. It is actually a very crowded space. When your mind goes blank right before you're supposed to speak, your brain is not empty, it is flooded. It is flooded with questions and fears and calculations, all happening at the same time, all competing for your attention, all demanding answers before they will let you open your mouth. Will my grammar be correct? Will they understand my accent? Am I using the right word? What if I forget the word in the middle? What if I say something embarrassing? What if they judge me? What if I sound stupid? What if they realize my English isn't as good as they think? None of those thoughts are about language. All of those thoughts are about perception, judgment, fear, and self-protection. They are psychological, they are emotional, they are deeply human, and they have almost nothing to do with whether you know enough English to speak. Here is a simple experiment that proves this. Think about something you know completely in English, a topic you love, a show you've watched 100 times, a song whose lyrics you know by heart, a recipe, an event in history that fascinates you. Now imagine explaining that thing to yourself, alone in your room, with no one listening. Notice how easily the words come. Notice how naturally you can describe it, explain it, talk about it, in English without freezing. Then imagine a real person standing in front of you, watching, listening, waiting. The topic is the same, the English is the same, but everything else changes. That change is not a language problem. That change is a pressure problem, a performance problem, a judgment problem, and those are problems we can solve, not with more grammar books, not with more vocabulary lists, with something far more powerful, understanding what your brain is actually doing when you freeze, and training it to do something different. That training begins in this masterclass. But first, you have to accept the most liberating truth about your situation. There's nothing wrong with your English. The problem has never been your English. The problem is that nobody taught you how to move your English from the inside to the outside. And that is exactly what we are going to do together. Lesson 2, the gap between understanding and speaking. Now that we know the freeze is not a language problem, let's look closely at what that gap actually is. The gap between understanding English and speaking it. Because understanding the gap is the first step to closing it. Language researchers have a term for this. They call it receptive competence and productive competence. Receptive competence is your ability to receive language, to hear it, read it, and understand it. Productive competence is your ability to produce language, to speak it and write it. Most language learners develop strong receptive competence long before they develop productive competence. This is completely normal. This is not a failure. This is how language acquisition works. But here is where most language teaching systems fail you. They assume that strong receptive competence automatically becomes strong productive competence over time. They assume that if you understand enough English, speaking will eventually follow naturally. And for some learners, in some environments, that happens. But for the majority of adult learners, it does not happen automatically. It requires specific, deliberate training, and most classrooms never provide it. So here you are, years of English input. Movies, textbooks, conversations you listen to, songs, podcasts, articles, all of it went in, very little was trained to come out. And now you wonder why the output is difficult. Imagine a river. On one side, there is a reservoir, massive, full of water, years of rainfall, accumulated. That reservoir is your English knowledge. It is enormous. On the other side, there is a channel leading from the reservoir to the open world, and that channel is narrow, almost blocked, not from lack of water, from lack of use. When you try to speak, you are trying to send water through a channel that has never been properly opened. The water is there is no shortage of water, but the channel is tight, unfamiliar, resistant, and so only a trickle comes out when there is actually a flood waiting behind it. The solution is not to add more water to the reservoir. The solution is to open the channel, and the channel opens through output practice, through actually speaking even imperfectly, even in small amounts, consistently, until the path between what you know and what you say becomes as wide and as natural as breathing. Now, here is the other side of this gap that most people never talk about. The gap is not just mechanical, it is also temporal. What I mean is this: when you understand someone speaking English, you have time. You hear the sentence, and even if you don't catch every word instantly, your brain processes, predicts, uses context, and arrives at meaning. You might take half a second, a full second, even 2 seconds to fully understand a sentence, and that feels fast, it feels instant. But when you speak, you don't have that same kind of time. You have to produce words in real time, continuous time, no pause, no rewind, no replay button. And for a learner who has trained mostly in reception, that real-time pressure is terrifying. Because your brain is used to processing language at its own pace, it has never been trained to produce language at conversation speed. This is why you can read an email in English perfectly, understand every word, and then sit down to write a reply and stare at the screen for 10 minutes, not because you don't know English, because writing, like speaking, requires real-time production. And real-time production is a different muscle from comprehension. So the gap between understanding and speaking comes from 2 places: the channel being underused and the brain being undertrained for real-time output. Both of these can be fixed. Both of these will be addressed in this masterclass. But it begins here, with you seeing the gap clearly and honestly, without blaming yourself, without thinking you are somehow less capable than other learners. You are not less capable, you are undertrained in one specific direction. And that direction is exactly where we are headed. Lesson 3, why your brain produces silence instead of words. Let's go deeper now. Let's look inside the moment of the freeze itself. What is happening in your brain in that exact second when the words won't come? Your brain is one of the most sophisticated objects in the known universe, and like all sophisticated systems, it has built-in protection mechanisms. When your brain detects danger, it activates those protection mechanisms. And here is the critical thing you need to understand. Your brain cannot always tell the difference between physical danger and social danger. Physical danger is a tiger running at you, a car about to hit you, a fire in the room. Social danger is the possibility of embarrassment, judgment, rejection, or failure in front of other people. When your brain detects social danger, it sends out the same family of signals it sends out for physical danger. Not exactly the same signals, not quite the same intensity, but the same basic alarm. And one of the things those alarm signals do is reduce the availability of your higher level cognitive functions. The creative, flexible, language-producing parts of your brain get quieter. Your processing narrows, your working memory shrinks. This is why you go blank when the pressure is high, not because your English disappeared, because your brain allocated its resources towards self-protection rather than word production. It is trying to protect you. It is doing its job. The problem is its job description was written for a very different world than the one you are living in now. Now combine that alarm response with something else: anticipatory anxiety. This is the anxiety you feel before the stressful moment, just from knowing the stressful moment is coming. If you are in a class where the teacher calls on students, you might start feeling anxious the moment you sit down. Not when you are called on, before, because your brain is already running simulations of what might happen. And those simulations activate the alarm response before the situation even arrives. So by the time it's actually your turn to speak, your brain has already been in low-level protection mode for minutes, sometimes longer. And when the moment comes, the alarm spikes, the cognitive resources narrow, and the words disappear. There is also a phenomenon called the tip of the tongue state. You know the feeling, you know the word exists, you have used it before. You can almost feel the shape of it, but it won't come. In normal circumstances, this happens to everyone occasionally, even in their native language. But under pressure, the tip of the tongue state becomes far more frequent because the alarm response interferes with the retrieval pathways in your memory. The word is in there, your brain just can't access it under these conditions, like trying to find a document on a computer that's overheating. The file is there, the system just won't cooperate right now. And then there is internal monitoring. This is perhaps the most paralyzing of all the mechanisms that work during a freeze. Internal monitoring is your brain watching itself speak, checking itself, evaluating itself in real time. Native speakers do this too, but they do it far more loosely, with far less riding on the result. For a language learner under pressure, internal monitoring becomes hyperactive. Every sentence gets evaluated before it leaves your mouth, and any sentence that doesn't pass evaluation gets stopped. What does the evaluation check for? Correctness, mostly. Is the grammar right? Is the word choice accurate? Is the pronunciation going to be clear? Is this sentence going to embarrass me? And because no sentence can pass all of those checks perfectly, especially under pressure, the monitoring system shuts down the output. It decides better to say nothing than to say something wrong. But here's the devastating paradox. Saying nothing is itself a choice that has consequences. Saying nothing means the conversation doesn't happen, the connection doesn't form, the opportunity doesn't arrive, the learning doesn't occur. Silence feels like safety, but it is actually a very expensive kind of safety, because what you pay for it is your growth, your relationships, your opportunities, and ultimately your fluency. The good news is that understanding what your brain is doing is the beginning of changing it. Once you know that the freeze is a protection response, not a language failure, you can start working with your brain rather than against it. You can begin to lower the alarm signals. You can retrain your internal monitor to be less harsh, less punishing, less trigger happy. You can open up the retrieval pathways by practicing output in low pressure environments first. You can build fluency not despite your brain's protection instincts, but alongside them. That's what the rest of this masterclass is about. Lesson 4. The permission problem. There is a question that sits at the center of almost every English learner who freezes when speaking. It's a question that no textbook ever addresses, and it goes like this. Who said you are allowed to speak? This sounds like a strange question. Of course you are allowed to speak. You are a person. You have studied English. You are in a conversation. Speaking is literally what you're supposed to do. But stay with me here, because this is deeper than it sounds. Most people who freeze when speaking in English are waiting for permission, not from the person in front of them, from themselves. They are waiting to feel ready. They are waiting until their English is good enough. They are waiting until they are confident enough. They are waiting until the risk of embarrassment is low enough. They are waiting for a kind of internal green light that says, yes, now you may speak. And the devastating truth is that for most people in this situation, that green light never comes. Not because it's impossible, but because they have set the conditions for it incorrectly. The condition for the green light is usually, I will speak when I am fluent. But fluency doesn't come before speaking. Fluency comes from speaking. So the person waiting to be fluent before they speak is waiting for something that can only arrive after they have already started doing the thing they are waiting to be ready for. This is the permission paradox, and it keeps learners frozen for years, sometimes decades. Incredibly intelligent, capable, knowledgeable people who understand English beautifully, who could contribute enormously to any conversation, staying silent because they have not yet granted themselves permission to be imperfect in public. Let's talk about where this comes from. For many learners, it comes from education systems that treated language errors as failures. Systems where a wrong answer meant embarrassment, where a grammar mistake was circled in red, where speaking incorrectly in front of classmates meant laughter or correction or a lower grade. If you spent years in an environment that punished language errors, your brain learned something very clear. Don't speak unless you're sure you're right. And your brain is still operating on that lesson even now, even though the classroom is gone. For other learners, it comes from perfectionism, a deep personal tendency to want to do things correctly, completely, without error. Perfectionism is not a flaw in itself. In many areas of life, it serves you extremely well. But in language learning, particularly in speaking, perfectionism is poison, because speaking is inherently imperfect. Native speakers make errors constantly. They mispronounce words, they lose their train of thought, they use informal grammar in formal settings, they say the wrong word and correct it mid-sentence. All of this is normal. All of this is part of real communication. But the perfectionist's internal monitor cannot accept this. It demands a level of accuracy that is impossible to achieve in real-time speech. And so rather than speak imperfectly, it chooses not to speak at all. For others, it comes from a specific shame attached to their accent, their background, their first language, a feeling that their English will always sound foreign, will always mark them as an outsider, will always invite judgment. And from that shame grows a protective silence. If I don't speak, they can't hear my accent. If they can't hear my accent, they can't judge me for it. Wherever it comes from, the result is the same. A person who is capable of speaking, choosing not to because they have never given themselves permission to be a learner in public. Here is the permission I am giving you right now. You don't need to wait for me to give it to you, but sometimes hearing it from the outside helps before you can believe it from the inside. So here it is. You are allowed to speak imperfect English. You are allowed to make grammar mistakes. You are allowed to say the wrong word and correct it. You are allowed to pause while you find the right phrase. You are allowed to have an accent. You are allowed to be a learner. You are allowed to be in the middle of the process. You are allowed to show up with the English you have right now, not the English you hope to have someday. Because the English you have right now is enough to begin. And beginning is the only thing that makes the English you have tomorrow better than the English you have today. Lesson 5. The inner critic that speaks before you do. Before you say a single word in English, there is already a voice speaking inside your head, and that voice is not on your side. We call it the inner critic. In the context of language speaking, the inner critic is that internal voice that comments, judges, and evaluates everything that is about to come out of your mouth before it comes out. It is the voice that says, that's wrong, that's embarrassing. They're going to think you don't speak English well. Use a simpler word. No, that word isn't right either. Just don't say anything, just nod, just smile, just stay quiet. The inner critic is fast, faster than speech. It operates at the speed of thought, which means it can block entire sentences before you even begin to form them. And because it sounds so authoritative, so certain, so convincing inside your own head, most people believe what it says. They treat the inner critic's verdict as truth. You are not ready, your English is not good enough, this is going to go wrong. But the inner critic is not speaking truth. The inner critic is speaking fear. And there is a crucial difference between the two. Truth is, you made a grammar error in that sentence. Fear is, because you made a grammar error, you are incompetent and everyone will think so, and this will be catastrophic. Truth is calm, specific, and correctable. Fear is global, catastrophizing, and paralyzing. The inner critic always speaks in fear's voice, even when it starts with something that sounds like truth. Here is how to recognize the inner critic's specific patterns in the language speaking context. First pattern, the all or nothing judgment. You stumble on a word and the inner critic says, see, your English is terrible. Not, you stumbled on one word which is normal, but your English is terrible. That jump from a specific event to a global conclusion is classic inner critic behavior. It takes one moment and turns it into a verdict about your entire capability. Second pattern, mind reading. The inner critic pretends to know what the other person is thinking. They probably think your English is bad. They're probably judging your accent. They probably wish they were talking to someone else. None of these things are true. None of these things are known. But the inner critic presents them as facts, and your brain accepts them as such, and the alarm response rises and the words disappear. Third pattern, catastrophizing. The inner critic takes a small possible mistake and inflates it to its worst possible consequence. If you say the wrong tense, the inner critic doesn't say, they'll understand you and life will go on. It says they'll think you're uneducated, or worse, they'll laugh, or worse, this will permanently damage how they see you. Catastrophizing takes a realistic small risk and turns it into an unbearable scenario, and the mind, trying to avoid that scenario, chooses silence. Fourth pattern, comparison. The inner critic compares your English not to what is reasonable or what is real, but to an impossible standard. It might compare you to a native speaker. It might compare you to that one learner you know who seems incredibly fluent and confident. It might compare you to who you think you should be by now. And every comparison goes the same way. You are not enough. Now here is the most important thing to understand about the inner critic. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be switched off. It is part of how human minds work, part of the same protection system we explored in the previous lesson. But it can be managed. And one of the most effective ways to manage it is simply to name it. When you notice the inner critic speaking, instead of arguing with it or obeying it, simply name what it is doing. There's that catastrophizing, there's the mind reading again, there's the all or nothing voice. Naming the pattern creates a tiny bit of distance between you and the thought. And in that distance, you have a choice. You don't have to believe everything the inner critic says. You don't have to act on its verdict. You can hear it, name it, set it to one side, and speak anyway. This skill, speaking anyway, speaking despite the inner critic's objection, is one of the most powerful skills you will develop in this masterclass. Not because the inner critic goes silent, but because you stop waiting for it to go silent before you act. Lesson 6. How passive English becomes active English. We have spent the first 5 lessons understanding the problem in its full depth. Now we begin the work of solving it. And we start with the most fundamental practical shift you can make, converting your passive English into active English. Passive English is everything you know but can only receive. Words you recognize when you hear them but would never use in speech. Grammar structures you understand when you read them but would never construct in real time. Phrases you have heard 100 times but have never personally said aloud. Passive English is your reservoir, enormous, rich, full of water. Active English is what you can produce. Words you reach for instinctively. Sentence structures that feel natural when you build them. Phrases that live in your mouth, not just your mind. Active English is your channel. Right now, for most learners who freeze, the channel is much narrower than the reservoir. Passive English is vast. Active English is a trickle. The process of converting passive English to active English is called activation. And it is not complicated in concept, though it requires consistent practice. Activation means taking something you understand and actually using it out loud in real sentences, repeatedly, until it moves from the recognition zone to the production zone, until it stops being something you know about and becomes something you can do. Here is a concrete way to think about this. Your passive vocabulary, the words you understand, is likely 3 to 5 times larger than your active vocabulary, the words you use naturally in speech. This ratio is normal, but for many learners, the ratio is even more extreme than that, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. They understand thousands of words they have never once tried to say out loud. And so those words live in the passive zone, recognized but not retrieved, understood but not produced. Activation therapy, and yes, we are going to call it therapy because it is that important, works in stages. The first stage is intentional practice in safe conditions. Take words or phrases from your passive vocabulary and use them deliberately in private speech. Narrate what you are doing. Describe things around you, tell yourself stories, explain things to yourself out loud. The goal is not accuracy in the first stage, the goal is movement, getting the words from passive to active, from inside to outside, from understood to produced. The second stage is deliberate use in real conversations. Once you have practiced a word or phrase in safe conditions, you create small opportunities to use it in actual interaction. This might feel artificial at first, and that's completely fine. Deliberate practice always feels slightly artificial before it becomes natural. Use the word once, in a real context with a real person, even if the conversation is brief, even if the person is a shopkeeper or a classmate or a stranger asking for directions. Use the word and notice that the world does not end. The third stage is integration. This is when the word or phrase stops requiring deliberate thought and simply arrives when you need it. This is fluency in microcosm, not fluency in the whole language, but fluency in that one word, that one phrase, and every word and phrase that moves from passive to active and then integrates makes you more fluent overall, not in a dramatic leap, in a steady, reliable accumulation. Now let's talk about how to do this deliberately. Every day you consume English passively. Maybe you watch something, maybe you read something, maybe you listen to something. That passive input is valuable, but if you only consume, you only grow the reservoir. To grow the channel, you need to add a practice where you take something from what you just consumed and produce it, say it back, summarize it aloud. Use one new phrase from what you just heard in 3 different example sentences. Record yourself, don't just absorb, activate. This single habit, adding active output to your existing passive input, is one of the most powerful changes you can make to your speaking development. And it doesn't require a conversation partner. It doesn't require a class. It requires only your voice, your commitment, and the understanding that passive knowledge only becomes real fluency when it moves through your mouth. Lesson 7, the rehearsal trap. There is a habit that almost every English learner who struggles to speak has developed, usually without realizing it. And that habit, despite feeling helpful, is secretly one of the biggest reasons they continue to freeze. It is called mental rehearsal, and we need to talk about it honestly. Mental rehearsal is what happens when you prepare for a conversation by running it through your head first. You think about what you're going to say, you construct the sentences in your mind, you imagine how the conversation will go, and you mentally prepare your responses. Before a meeting, before a phone call, before meeting someone for the first time, you rehearse internally, silently, in your head. And here is why this feels so right and why it is so wrong. It feels right because rehearsal is a real concept that works in many areas of performance. Musicians rehearse, actors rehearse, athletes mentally rehearse movements before executing them. Rehearsal builds confidence and readiness. So the instinct to rehearse a conversation before it happens seems completely logical. But here is what makes conversation different from every other form of performance. A conversation is not a solo performance. It is a live, dynamic, unpredictable exchange between two people. It has no script. It changes direction constantly. What the other person says cannot be predicted. What they ask, how they respond, where they take the topic, what tangent they follow, none of this can be controlled or rehearsed from your end. So when you mentally rehearse a conversation, you are rehearsing a fantasy, a version of the conversation that will not happen. You are preparing for something that won't exist. And when the actual conversation begins and immediately diverges from your rehearsed version, your prepared sentences are suddenly useless. The script you practiced doesn't fit the scene in front of you. And now you're back to improvising, which is exactly what you were hoping to avoid. Except now you're less prepared than if you hadn't rehearsed at all, because your brain was trying to execute a plan that no longer applies. This is the rehearsal trap. It gives you the feeling of preparation without giving you the actual skills of real-time speaking. And real-time speaking requires something rehearsal cannot provide, the ability to think and produce language simultaneously in live conditions. But there is another, deeper problem with heavy mental rehearsal. It trains your brain to associate speaking with preparation. Over time, your brain learns, I can only speak if I've prepared what I'm going to say. And once that association is established, the idea of speaking spontaneously without having rehearsed first becomes genuinely frightening. The brain treats unrehearsed speaking as a high-risk situation, and the protection response activates. What is the alternative? The alternative is not to eliminate preparation entirely. Preparation has its place. If you are going to give a speech, preparation is essential. If you are going to do a job interview in English, practicing your answers is smart and necessary. These are scripted performances, and rehearsal applies. But for everyday conversation, for the kind of real-time English exchange that you want to get better at, the alternative to mental rehearsal is what we might call live practice. Practice that simulates real conditions. Practice where you don't know what's coming. Practice where you have to respond in real time without a script. This can be done alone. It can be done with language apps that throw unexpected questions at you. It can be done by watching a video and pausing it to respond out loud to things the speaker says. It can be done in real conversation with strangers or language exchange partners. The goal is to train your brain to function in live conditions, to build the reflex of real-time production, not the habit of pre-planned speaking. Because conversations don't wait for your rehearsal to be done, they happen now. And your brain needs to be trained for now. Lesson 8, the output emergency. We are going to talk now about something that might feel uncomfortable, something that contradicts a lot of what you've been told about language learning. And that something is this: you have a speaking emergency, and the solution is to create more emergencies. Let me explain. An emergency, in the context of language learning, is any situation where you have to speak and you cannot escape speaking, where there is no opt-out, where silence is not an option. These situations are often the most terrifying for learners who freeze, but they are also the most productive, because in an emergency, your brain has no choice but to produce. And when your brain produces language under pressure and the world does not end, it learns something enormously valuable. This is survivable. This is okay. I can do this. The problem is that most learners spend all their time avoiding emergencies. They choose situations where they can stay quiet. They let someone else order at the restaurant. They stay silent in the meeting. They communicate by text instead of by voice. They choose the option that never forces their mouth to open. And this avoidance, while it feels like relief in the moment, slowly confirms the belief that speaking is dangerous. Every time you avoid speaking, you send your brain a message, I was right to be afraid. That situation was too much for me. And the fear grows stronger, not weaker. The alternative is deliberate exposure, creating small speaking emergencies for yourself in increasing order of difficulty so that your brain gets repeated evidence that speaking is survivable. This is based on a well-established principle in psychology called exposure therapy. When you expose yourself to the thing you fear, in controlled, manageable doses, the fear response reduces over time. Not because the situation becomes less real, but because your brain accumulates evidence that the outcome is not catastrophic. Here is a simple progression for creating your own speaking emergencies, starting from the lowest possible pressure. The first level is speaking to yourself. Narrate your day. Talk yourself through what you are doing. Describe the room you're in. Explain a news story you just read as if you're telling someone about it. Your audience is no one, the pressure is zero, but your mouth is producing English. The channel is opening. The second level is recording yourself. Speak into your phone, have a conversation with a camera. This adds one small element of self-consciousness because now there is a record of what you said and you can play it back. The pressure is still very low, but it's higher than talking to yourself with no record. The third level is speaking to strangers in low-stakes situations, ordering coffee, asking for directions, commenting on something at the checkout counter. These interactions are brief, the other person doesn't know you, the stakes of impression management are very low, and the interaction ends quickly, but they require your brain to produce English in a real social context, and your brain will log each one as a success. The fourth level is speaking in familiar contexts with acquaintances, a casual conversation with a classmate, a coworker, a neighbor, someone who knows you a little, which feels higher stakes, but also means they have some goodwill towards you already. The fifth level is speaking in meaningful or professional contexts, a meeting in English, a presentation, a conversation with someone whose opinion of you matters to you. This is the level most people are afraid of, and it should be the last level you push toward, not the first. The key principle is this: never stay at a level long enough to get comfortable and stop. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Comfortable means you're not pushing, and pushing is what builds the speaking muscle. Create your emergencies deliberately. Make them slightly uncomfortable, survive them, and do it again. Because every emergency you survive makes the next one a little less terrifying. And the accumulation of survived emergencies is what we call confidence. Lesson 9, breaking the translation habit. There is a conversation happening inside the head of almost every English learner who freezes when speaking. And it is a conversation in two languages. It goes like this. Someone asks you a question in English. Your brain receives the question in English. Then, before you can respond, your brain translates it into your first language. Then your brain thinks of the answer in your first language. Then your brain tries to translate the answer back into English. And by the time you finish this 4-step process, either too much time has passed or the translation went wrong somewhere in the chain and you're confused and you freeze. This is the translation habit, and it is one of the most significant speed killers in English speaking. The translation habit isn't your fault. It developed because of how most people learn English in school. In most traditional classrooms, language is taught through translation. The teacher introduces an English word by giving you its equivalent in your first language. English grammar rules are explained in your first language. Comprehension exercises ask you to translate. Everything goes through the filter of your native tongue. And so your brain learns to understand English, first turn it into your language. To speak English, first think in your language and then convert. This works well enough for reading and writing where speed doesn't matter. But in spoken conversation where you need to produce language in real time, the translation chain is too slow. By the time you've finished translating, the moment has passed. The alternative is thinking in English. And I know that sounds like magic, like something only advanced speakers can do, But I want you to understand that thinking in English is not a destination that fluent speakers arrived at suddenly. It is a habit that they built through practice. And you can build it too, starting today, regardless of your current level. Here is how thinking in English actually works and how to develop it. The first step is to reduce the role of your first language as the middleman. When you hear an English word, instead of looking for its equivalent in your first language, try to associate it with an image, a sensation, a memory, a scene. The word rain doesn't need to be translated into your language's word for rain. It just needs to connect to the sensation and image of rain. The direct association between English word and real-world concept, bypassing your first language entirely, is the foundation of thinking in English. The second step is internal monologue practice. Your internal monologue, the voice that runs commentary in your head throughout the day, is probably in your first language. Moving some of that internal commentary into English is one of the most effective ways to build the thinking in English habit. You don't have to do it all the time. Start with 5 minutes a day. Just narrate your experience in English inside your head. What you're doing, what you're looking at, what you're thinking about, quietly, privately. This is the practice of growing an English-speaking voice inside your head, and it pays enormous dividends in speaking speed and fluency. The third step is accepting approximate language. One of the reasons translation feels necessary is that learners are searching for the exact perfect word in English that matches what they want to say in their first language. But English often doesn't have that exact word. Or you can't remember it under pressure, and when the exact word doesn't appear, the translation chain breaks and you freeze. The solution is to use the closest English word you have, the approximate word, the good enough word. Describe around the word you can't find. Say it a different way. Native speakers do this constantly and nobody notices. If you can't think of the word immediately, don't stop. Keep going with what you have. Your meaning can be communicated even with approximate language, and communicating even approximately is infinitely more valuable than staying silent while you search for perfection. The goal is not to eliminate your first language. It will always be part of you, and that is beautiful and valuable. The goal is to grow a second voice, an English voice, that can operate independently, at speed, without waiting for translation, and that voice grows one practice session at a time. Lesson 10, the identity shift. We are now going to talk about something that goes deeper than skills, deeper than habits, deeper even than the psychology we've explored so far. We are going to talk about who you believe you are when it comes to English speaking, because the most profound block to fluent speech is not in your vocabulary or your grammar or your pronunciation. It is in your identity. Identity is the story you tell about yourself, the beliefs you hold about who you are and what you are capable of. And most English learners who freeze when speaking have a hidden identity story that goes something like this. I am someone who understands English well, but who cannot speak it confidently. That story might be invisible to you. It might not be something you would ever say out loud, but it shapes every conversation you approach and every conversation you avoid. Psychologists who study identity tell us that humans are remarkably consistent with their self-concept. We act in ways that confirm who we believe ourselves to be. If you believe you are someone who freezes when speaking English, your behavior will consistently produce evidence for that belief. You will avoid situations that challenge it. You will interpret ambiguous events as confirming it. You will notice your failures more than your successes, because your brain is trying to maintain the story of who you are. And here is the hardest truth of this lesson. This identity story was not chosen by you. It was assigned to you by a history of experiences. The classroom where errors were punished. The moment someone laughed at your pronunciation. The job interview where you stumbled and didn't get the position. The conversation where you went blank and the awkward silence lasted too long. These experiences built the story, and the story built the identity, and the identity built the freeze. But identities can be rebuilt, not instantly, not without effort, but they can be rebuilt. And the rebuilding doesn't begin by waiting until you have evidence of success. It begins by choosing the identity first, and then gathering evidence that confirms it. This might sound backwards, but it is exactly how identity change works. You decide, I am someone who speaks English. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, not without moments of struggle, but someone who speaks. someone who engages, someone who shows up and uses the English they have. You claim that identity before the evidence is fully there, and then you act from that identity one small moment at a time, and the evidence begins to accumulate. This is sometimes called acting as if, not pretending, not faking, but aligning your behavior with the person you are choosing to become even before it feels completely natural. An actor doesn't wait to feel like a character before performing the role. They put on the costume, they speak the lines, and the feeling of the character builds through the doing. The same principle applies here. When you walk into a situation where English will be spoken, you choose your identity before you enter. I am a speaker. I communicate in English. I am in the middle of getting better, and that's fine, and I show up anyway. And you let that identity guide your choices. Do I speak or do I stay silent? The speaker speaks. Do I take the easier opt-out or do I attempt the harder thing? The speaker attempts the harder thing. There is also a second dimension to this identity shift, and it concerns how you see yourself in relation to the language itself. Many learners see themselves as guests in English, visitors, as if English is a house that belongs to native speakers, and they are only allowed in as long as they follow all the rules and don't make too much noise and leave everything exactly as they found it. This guest identity keeps you small, it keeps you apologetic, it keeps you hesitant. But English is not a house with an owner. It is a shared resource used by nearly 2 billion people on this planet, the majority of whom are not native speakers. It is used in business meetings in Tokyo and Lagos and São Paulo. It is the language of international science, international travel, international art. It belongs as much to the learner as to anyone born speaking it. You are not a guest in English, you are a rightful user of it. And that shift in how you see your relationship to the language changes how confidently you inhabit it. Claim your right to the language, claim your identity as a speaker, and let your behavior follow. Lesson 11, the first 3 words rule. Everything we have covered so far has been essential groundwork, understanding the freeze, understanding the gap, understanding the brain and the inner critic and the rehearsal trap and the translation habit and the identity, all of it necessary, all of it real. But now let's get extremely practical, because understanding without technique is incomplete. Here is the first practical technique of this masterclass, and it is one of the most immediately useful things I will tell you. It is called the first 3 words rule. The rule is simple. When you need to speak and you feel the freeze beginning, your only job is to say the first 3 words. Not the perfect sentence, not the complete thought, not the grammatically correct and fully formed response. Just 3 words, the first 3 that come to you, out loud, in English. Why 3 words? Because 3 words are enough to break the silence. And breaking the silence is the only thing that matters in the first second of speaking. Once you break the silence, once any sound comes out, the brain's alarm response decreases. The act of speaking, even 3 words, signals to your nervous system that the situation is underway and survivable. And once the alarm decreases, more words can come. The channel opens, the rest of the sentence begins to follow. Think about this physically. When you freeze, your throat tightens, your jaw locks, your breath gets shallow. You are literally holding your body closed against the possibility of speech. The first 3 words force your body to open. Jaw moves, air moves, sound comes out. And the physical opening leads to the cognitive opening. Once you are speaking, your brain switches from protection mode to production mode. Not completely, not instantly, but enough to let more words through. Let's look at how this works in practice. Someone asks you a question and you feel the freeze starting. Instead of waiting until you have the perfect answer, you say the first 3 words of whatever response is coming. That's a great question. Well, I think. So, actually, I believe. There are some very good English conversation starters, phrases that buy you a half second of time while your brain catches up. That's actually really, well, from my experience, I was just thinking it depends on, I'm not sure, but these are not filler phrases, they are launching pads. They get you off the ground. And once you're off the ground, landing is much easier. This technique works because it separates the start from the rest. Most people who freeze are trying to start and finish at the same time. They are trying to have the entire sentence ready before they begin to speak. But that's not how speaking works, even for native speakers. Speaking is constructed in real time, sentence by sentence, thought emerging as words emerge. You don't need to have it all ready before you begin. You just need to begin. The first 3 words rule also works because it gives you a behavioral instruction that is small enough to feel manageable. When someone tells you to be more confident, that's not a behavior, that's a state. You can't just decide to be confident, but you can decide to say 3 words. 3 words is a behavior. It is concrete, it is executable, and it is within your control, even when everything else feels out of control. Practice this rule in low-stakes situations first. When you're talking to yourself, when you're responding to a video, notice how the first 3 words change the energy of what follows. Then bring it into real conversations deliberately. Feel the freeze starting, say 3 words, and let the rest come. You will be surprised how often those 3 words are enough to unlock a full conversation you didn't think you could have. There is one more layer to this technique that makes it even more powerful. When you commit to the first 3 words rule, you stop trying to control the outcome of what you say before you say it. You stop trying to guarantee that the sentence will be perfect before it begins. And that release of control is precisely what allows the language to flow. Control is the enemy of fluency. The tight grip of wanting to get it exactly right before speaking is what closes the channel. The first 3 words rule teaches your mouth to move before your inner critic has time to object. It is a bypass, a workaround, a small act of courage that leads to large acts of communication. Lesson 12, building spoken confidence without a conversation partner. One of the most common barriers that English learners mention when asked about their speaking practice is the lack of a conversation partner. I don't have anyone to practice with. My friends all speak my first language. I live in a place where English is not commonly used. I don't have access to native speakers. I'm shy about approaching people for language exchange. And so the speaking practice doesn't happen, and the freeze continues, and the learner waits for the conditions to be right. But here is the truth that will change your practice entirely. You don't need a conversation partner to build spoken English confidence. Not in the beginning, not while you're working on opening the channel and activating your passive vocabulary and training your brain for real-time output. You need your own voice, and your own voice is always available. Let's walk through a complete system of solo speaking practice that you can begin today. The first practice is called stream of consciousness speaking. Set a timer for 3 minutes. Speak without stopping about anything. What you did this morning, what you're thinking about, a problem you're trying to solve, a story you remember, a place you've been. The goal is not coherence, not grammar, not even interesting content. The goal is continuous output. 3 minutes without silence. If you run out of things to say, describe the room you're in. If you run out of that, describe the color of the wall. The practice is not about what you say. It is about keeping the output channel open and flowing. The second practice is called shadow speaking. This is one of the most powerful fluency building exercises in existence. You listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say slightly after them, mimicking not just the words, but the rhythm, the stress, the tone, the pauses. You can do this with movies, podcasts, news broadcasts, anything where you can hear natural speech. The magic of shadow speaking is that it trains your mouth to produce English at natural speed. It breaks the slow, careful, word-by-word pattern and replaces it with a flowing, rhythmic pattern of real conversation. The third practice is the question and answer monologue. You record yourself asking a question in English, then you stop the recording, and you answer the question out loud spontaneously. You can use questions from a list. If you search online, there are thousands of English-speaking prompt lists available. You can use questions from a practice test. You can generate your own. The key is that you don't know exactly what you're going to say before you start speaking. You respond in real time. This is solo improvisation, and it trains the exact mental process that real conversation requires. The fourth practice is the opinion monologue. You take a topic, any topic, something in the news, a philosophical question, a practical dilemma, and you speak your opinion on it for 2 minutes. No notes, no preparation, just your thoughts, in English out loud for 2 minutes. This builds the skill of organizing and producing thoughts in English simultaneously, which is the core skill of natural conversation. The fifth practice is retelling. You read or watch something interesting, then you close the book or turn off the video, and you retell what you just consumed in your own words in English out loud. This is the activation process we discussed in Lesson 6. You are taking passive input and converting it to active output, and you are practicing the kind of organized narrative speech that you use in real conversation when you tell stories, share news, or explain things. These 5 practices, done consistently, even for 15 to 20 minutes a day, will build spoken fluency significantly. Not because they perfectly replicate conversation, but because they exercise the muscle that conversation requires. And when the time for real conversation comes, that muscle is ready. You don't need to wait for a partner. You need to begin today with your own voice, in your own room, speaking to no one but yourself and your future fluency. Lesson 13, handling mistakes without shutting down. Mistakes are going to happen. In fact, here is a guarantee I am comfortable making. Mistakes will happen every single time you speak English for the rest of your life. Even after you are fluent, even after you are advanced, even after you have been speaking English confidently for 20 years. Mistakes are not a phase you pass through. They are a permanent feature of real communication in any language, and how you handle them will determine everything about your speaking confidence. Most learners who freeze have an extremely unhealthy relationship with their own mistakes, and that unhealthy relationship usually takes one of 2 forms. The first form is overreaction. A mistake happens and the emotional response is enormous. Shame, embarrassment, a spike of anxiety, a strong desire to stop speaking or to leave the situation. The mistake feels like an exposure, like the inner critic's worst predictions have come true, like everyone now knows you are not as fluent as they thought. The body contracts. The voice gets quieter, the confidence drops, and the next attempt becomes even harder. The second form is catastrophic interruption. The learner is speaking, makes a mistake, and rather than continuing, stops completely, tries to go back and fix the mistake, gets confused in the correction process, loses the thread of what they were saying, and arrives at an even more embarrassing silence than the original mistake would have produced. The attempt to fix the mistake became worse than the mistake itself. Native speakers, fluent speakers, professional communicators, all of them make mistakes, and all of them have learned the same fundamental skill for handling mistakes. They keep going. They say the wrong word and immediately say the right one. They use the wrong tense, and if they notice, they correct it in a natural, calm way without drama. They mispronounce something, and if needed, they repeat it more clearly. They handle mistakes as a normal part of speaking, not as catastrophes that require emergency management. The skill is called graceful error recovery, and it has 3 components. The first component is the quick self-correction. You say something wrong and you catch it. Instead of stopping, freezing, or spiraling into apology, you simply say the right thing immediately after. I went to the store yesterday. No, I mean tomorrow. I called her. I mean I texted her. Quick, calm, forward moving. You don't dwell on it. You don't highlight it. You just correct and continue. This is exactly what native speakers do. And the listener barely registers the correction because it was handled so smoothly. The second component is the acceptance without apology. Sometimes you make a mistake and either you don't catch it, or you catch it, but it was so small that stopping to correct it would interrupt the flow of what you were saying. In that case, you accept the mistake internally and keep going. You do not stop mid-sentence to apologize for your English. You do not preface sentences with "Sorry, my English is not very good." These apologies are well-intentioned, but they invite the listener to lower their expectations of you, which is not what you want. They also take up time and energy that could be going toward actual communication. Make the mistake, keep going, move forward. The third component is the post-conversation reflection. After the conversation, not during it, you can review what mistakes you noticed, not with harsh judgment, with curiosity. That word came out wrong. Next time, I'll try to remember the correct form. That sentence structure confused me. I'll practice that pattern. This is learning from mistakes in a productive way, separate from the emotion of the moment when they occurred. Here is something else that will profoundly change your relationship with mistakes. Other people are not listening as closely as you think. The person you are talking to is primarily focused on your meaning, your message, your intent. They are not running a grammar audit on your speech. They are not cataloging your errors. They are engaged in the conversation, thinking about what they want to say next. interested in the content of your message. The microscope you are putting on your own mistakes is far more powerful than anything anyone else is using on you. When you make a mistake and feel that spike of self-consciousness, remind yourself of this. The other person heard your meaning. They understood you. The conversation continued. That is success. That is communication. The mistake was a small feature of a larger success. And that reframing will slowly, over time, make mistakes feel less catastrophic and more like what they actually are, a natural, inevitable, completely manageable part of being a speaker. Lesson 14. The momentum method. We are reaching the final lesson of this masterclass. And in this lesson, we are going to put everything together into a system for creating and sustaining speaking momentum, because momentum is the force that converts all of this understanding into actual, lasting fluency. Here is what momentum means in the context of speaking. Momentum means that your speaking practice builds on itself. Each session makes the next one a little more natural. Each conversation makes the following conversation a little less frightening. Each mistake you survive reduces the fear of the next mistake. Each success gives your brain a little more confidence that speaking is okay. Momentum is the compound interest of speaking practice, and like financial compound interest, it is slow to start and powerful over time. The enemy of momentum is inconsistency, long gaps between practice sessions, weeks or months of avoidance followed by intense effort followed by avoidance again. The speaking muscle, like any muscle, loses its conditioning when it is not regularly used, and every long gap forces you to rebuild from a lower point. Consistency, even at small amounts, beats intensity with long gaps every time. Here is the momentum method. It is not complicated. In fact, its power comes partly from how simple it is. Every day you do 3 things for your speaking: 1 minute, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes. The 1-minute practice is immediate. It happens as early in the day as possible. As soon as you wake up, or with your morning coffee, or before you leave your home, you speak English for exactly 1 minute about anything. What day it is, what the weather feels like, what you hope to accomplish today. 1 minute. It is so small that there is no excuse for skipping it, and it warms up your speaking for the day. It says to your brain, today is a day where I speak English. It sets the tone. The 5-minute practice happens at some point during the day. This is your activation practice. You take something from your passive English, something you heard or read or watched, and you produce it actively. You summarize it aloud. You use a phrase from it in several different sentences. You explain the concept to an imaginary friend. 5 minutes of converting passive to active. The 10-minute practice happens later in the day. This is your challenge practice. It's where you do the harder things. The question and answer monologue, the opinion piece, the shadow speaking, the story retelling, something that requires sustained output and real-time processing. This is where the real growth happens. Together, that is 16 minutes of speaking practice per day. 16 minutes, that is less time than most people spend scrolling on their phones during breakfast. But 16 minutes of consistent speaking practice done every day without exception produces more improvement than 2 hours once a week, or 5 hours on a Saturday after 2 weeks of silence. Beyond this daily practice, the momentum method has one additional principle: the weekly conversation commitment. Once a week, you put yourself in a situation where real English conversation happens. A language exchange partner online, an English-speaking meetup in your city, a phone call that requires English, a service interaction in English, something where the stakes are real and the exchange is live. The daily practice builds the muscle. The weekly conversation tests it. Both are necessary. There is also a tracking component to the momentum method, because tracking creates accountability and reveals progress that you might otherwise miss. Every day after your practice, you note one thing you did well and one thing you want to improve. Not a long reflection, just one thing each. Over weeks, you will start to see patterns. You will notice the things that consistently go well, building into genuine strengths. You will notice the areas that consistently need work, and you will find those areas getting better as you deliberately practice them. But the most important part of the momentum method is not any specific technique or time allocation. It is the commitment to continuity, to not stopping, to showing up for your English even on the days when you don't feel like it, even on the days when practice felt hard, even on the days after conversations that went wrong. The learners who achieve fluency are not always the most naturally gifted. They are not always the ones who started with the best accent or the largest vocabulary. They are the ones who kept going, who built a practice and protected it and came back to it after every interruption, who treated their speaking development as something they owed themselves, not something they would get around to when conditions were perfect. Conditions will never be perfect. The time will never be ideal. The confidence will not arrive before the practice. The practice creates the confidence, and the only way to have the practice is to begin it. Now, today, with the English you have, in the life you're living, in whatever imperfect conditions exist around you, closing the voice that has been waiting. We have come a long way together in this masterclass. We began with a single, painfully familiar moment. You understand everything but say nothing. And we have traveled from that moment through the psychology of the freeze, the mechanics of the gap, the protection responses of the brain, the cruelty of the inner critic, the trap of mental rehearsal, the slowness of translation, the power of identity, and the practical tools of activation, output practice, mistake recovery, and momentum. I want to leave you with something that is not a technique or a method or a principle, something more personal than that. Inside you, there is a version of you that speaks, a version of you that engages confidently in English, that contributes fully to conversations, that tells stories and shares opinions and asks questions and disagrees and laughs and connects. That version of you is not a fantasy. That version of you is not some distant future possibility that may or may not arrive. That version of you is already there. It has always been there. It's been sitting behind the freeze, waiting. The freeze is not who you are. The freeze is something that happened to you, a result of circumstances and education systems and fears and experiences that convinced a very capable person to stay quiet. But that quiet is not your nature, it is your habit. And habits can change. Everything you need to speak is already inside you. The words are there, the grammar patterns are there, the ability to understand, which you have proven again and again, means the language is deeply embedded in you. What is needed now is not more input. What is needed is the courage and the practice to let what's inside come outside. Speaking is not a performance. It is not a test. It is not an opportunity for the world to judge whether your English is good enough. Speaking is connection. It is the human act of reaching from your mind to another person's mind and saying, I am here. I have something to offer. I want to understand you and be understood. And that act, that basic human act of reaching, is available to you right now with the English you have right now. In the moment you are in right now, you do not need to be fluent before you deserve to be heard. You deserve to be heard because you are human and you have things to say, and the world is a richer place when more voices are in it. Your accent is not a flaw. Your learning process is not a weakness. Your imperfect English used bravely every day is the most powerful tool you have for getting to that English you want. The speaking momentum begins with one act, one sentence, 3 words, a breath, and then sound, and then the next sentence, and the next, and slowly, steadily, with practice and patience and the willingness to fail forward, the freeze begins to loosen, the channel begins to widen. The voice that has been waiting behind the silence begins to find its way out. This is the speaking momentum, and it begins for you today. Go back now to lesson 1 if you need to. Let the ideas settle, practice the techniques, return to the lessons that spoke most directly to the specific block you're dealing with. But more importantly, go find a moment today, even a tiny one, to speak, to open your mouth and let English come out. Not perfect English, not rehearsed English, just English, your English, the English of a learner who is moving forward. Because the world needs your voice, not someday, today. The conversations you have been putting off, the contributions you have been holding back, the connections you have been avoiding, they are waiting for you. People are waiting for you, not for your perfect grammar, not for your flawless accent. For you. The speaking momentum is already in motion. It started the moment you chose to listen to this masterclass. It continued through every lesson. It is building right now. All it needs from you is the one thing that only you can provide, the first word. Speak, keep speaking, and never stop.